Welcome to the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com, the show where we explore natural and human-made disasters from around the world. This is episode 52, the Andrea Doria disaster. The SS Andrea Doria was the pride of the Italian line. This luxurious transatlantic liner combined elegance, modern design, and the promise of a comfortable and safe passage across the Atlantic. Launched in 1953, she was built to high standards with multiple watertight compartments, strong structural integrity, and modern navigation gear. Her route was the familiar one, from Genoa, Italy, to New York City, carrying hundreds of passengers and crew each voyage. On the evening of the 25th of July, 1956, the Andrea Doria was nearing the end of her journey. She was navigating the North Atlantic, off the coast of Nantucket, Massachusetts. Conditions were challenging. Heavy fog blanketed the sea lanes, reducing visibility. Meanwhile, another ship, the MS Stockholm, a Swedish passenger liner, was proceeding eastbound toward New York. Despite radar systems being in use, fog and human error created conditions that led to one of the most infamous maritime disasters of the 20th century. At around 11:10 p.m. local time, radar readings on the Andrea Doria detected the presence of the other vessel. However, misinterpretation and limited visibility made it a hazardous situation. The ships approached on nearly crossing courses. The Andrea Doria, travelling westbound, was in dense fog for hours, whereas the Stockholm had just entered the fog bank. Each ship made course adjustments. Andrea Doria attempted a port-to-port passing, steering to the left, while the Stockholm manoeuvred to her starboard side. However, those manoeuvres put them on converging paths rather than diverging ones. By the time visual contact was made with Stockholm through the mist, it was too late to avoid disaster. The Stockholm's reinforced, ice-strengthened bow struck the Andrea Doria on her starboard side, penetrating deeply. Reports detail sections of up to 30 to 40 feet of her hull had been pierced. The impact tore open multiple decks, ruptured bulkheads, and flooded compartments. The force was concentrated near the midship area under the superstructure. The Stockholm suffered damage to her bow, but remained comparatively intact. On Andrea Doria, the breach allowed seawater to pour into 5 fuel tanks on the starboard side. Meanwhile, the portside tanks were nearly empty, having been used before the crossing. This imbalance caused a dramatic list to starboard, initially about 18 degrees and climbing quickly beyond 20 degrees. The listing made launching lifeboats from the portside impossible, and even deploying starboard lifeboats became difficult. The flooding also overwhelmed internal compartments. Some bulkheads, though rated watertight, became submerged above their tops, allowing water to flow across decks. The flooding reached the engine room, and attempts to pump out the water failed. Electrical systems began to falter as water invaded the lower decks. In the chaos, the captain gave the order to abandon ship, but the rapid list and flooding complicated the operation. Lifeboats on the safe side were overloaded. Some lines snapped. Many passengers had to be transferred to the Stockholm or to rescue vessels from other liners responding to distress calls. Remarkably, despite the severity of the damage, the Andrea Doria did not sink immediately. She remained afloat for about 11 hours, giving rescuers a window to save lives. The SOS calls went out. Nearby ships responded, including the Stockholm, the French liner Île-de-France, and other vessels in the North Atlantic lanes. The Stockholm, though damaged, took aboard hundreds of survivors, passengers and crew from Andrea Doria. The Île-de-France and other ships assisted in ferrying survivors and resources. The rescue effort unfolded amid darkness, fog, and danger. yet over 1,660 of the approximately 1,706 persons aboard Andrea Doria were saved. In total, 51 lives were lost, 46 aboard the Andrea Doria, mainly in the collision zone, and 5 crew members of the Stockholm. One of the more extraordinary survival stories is that of Linda Morgan, a young teenager who was in a cabin on the Andrea Doria when the Stockholm's bow pierced the wall. Her step-family in the same cabin perished, but Linda was thrown clear onto the deck of the Stockholm, relatively unhurt, a bizarre and rare miracle. As the night wore on, the listing liner drifted and continued to take on water. At around 10:09 a.m. on the 26th of July, Andrea Doria capsized and sank. The bow went under first. The stern rose, exposing the propeller shafts briefly before she disappeared beneath the waves. The ship sank to a depth of approximately 225 feet, roughly 18 nautical miles west by south of the Nantucket lightship. The dramatic visuals of her sinking were captured in aerial photographs, some of which would later win recognition. The final descent was quiet, a majestic ship vanishing into the ocean. In the investigations that followed, the collision raised many technical, human and regulatory questions. Andrea Doria was designed to withstand significant damage, featuring 11 watertight compartments that theoretically allowed her to remain afloat even if 2 adjacent compartments flooded. However, the imbalance in flooding, with 5 tanks on one side and asymmetric flooding across bulkheads, overwhelmed that protection. Also, there was a debate about whether one of the watertight doors was missing or malfunctioned. Some claimed a missing door allowed water to bypass bulkheads more quickly. Another design concern was ballast management. The empty fuel tanks on the port side, to save fuel and possibly for other logistical reasons, removed mass, meaning the ship floated higher and was more vulnerable to list when damage struck. Had the tanks been ballasted with seawater, the imbalance might not have been as severe. On the human side, both captains and officers were scrutinized. Did Captain Piero Calamai of Andrea Doria reduce speed sufficiently in fog? Did he act quickly enough on radar warnings? Did the Stockholm's officers misinterpret the radar or the distance? Some critics argued that, despite the fog, speed should have been reduced even further. Some cross-traffic protocols and radar rules were under review. Communication between the two ships was minimal. Radio calls, if any, came too late. The collision is often cited as the first major radar-assisted collision at sea. Radar was in use, but misinterpretation, assumptions about crossing rules, and overconfidence may have contributed more than mechanical failure. Lawsuits followed. The owners of Andrea Doria and Stockholm both faced claims. Legal hearings examined fault, design, and liability. Settlements were reached. Both companies absorbed the damage costs. Disbursements to victims and their families followed. The sinking of the Andrea Doria remains a landmark in maritime history. It was among the last great ocean liner disasters. Thanks in part to air travel overtaking transatlantic sea passages, such tragedies became rarer. But the lessons carried weight. One key lesson was that technology is only as good as the decisions that drive it. Radar and advanced navigation choices only work if operators interpret them conservatively, especially in demanding conditions like fog. Another consideration is that ship design must allow for extreme failure conditions, not just isolated damage, but also asymmetric flooding and list. Watertight compartments are helpful, but only when bulkheads maintain integrity above water. Thirdly, emergency procedures must assume worst-case scenarios. Here, the listing doomed many lifeboats. Redundancy in evacuation routes is crucial. Fourth, rescue operations can save lives even after severe damage has occurred. The prolonged survival time of Andrea Doria allowed coordinated rescues. Multi-ship cooperation saved many lives. Finally, the disaster prompted regulatory and operational changes in maritime safety, particularly for passenger vessels, including radar protocols, ballast practices, and collision avoidance procedures. The wreck itself became a site of fascination. Sitting upright initially, it later collapsed onto its side, resting now on a sloping ocean floor at depth. Over time, divers and explorers visited, recovering artifacts and studying damage. The wreck is also subject to decay, looting, and deterioration. Today, the memory of Andrea Doria lingers. It's taught in maritime studies, used in safety case studies, and remembered through stories of survival and loss. It reminds us that even in an age of advanced engineering, the sea remains unforgiving. Ships may fly flags of progress, but in fog, in degradation, in human error, tragedy can still strike. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com. If you did, why not leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/disaster coffee to see how. Also, please check out our other Compact podcasts. You will find them all at compacthistories.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.